Okay, everybody, welcome back. This is the last plenary session of the day before we have concluding remarks. Introducing myself, I'm Josh Burke. I'm a fellow at the London School of Economics at the Grantham Research Institute, and I'll be moderating this session. We've got three speakers. It's going to be a really great session, one I'm particularly excited about. I spent too much time thinking about this topic, so very pleased to hear the insights today. So the topic of this session, and what we're going to do is explore the policy, legal and financial frameworks in leading jurisdictions such as the UK, the EU and India, and how they can operationalise industrial scaling of CDR within compliance and voluntary markets. So we've got three speakers today. I'm going to introduce them. First up is Antigone Theochridou from Imperial College London. Will then be followed by Hrafnhilde Bragadottir from the University of Iceland. And finally, last but not least, we'll have Ashir Rahman, who is from Impact Roots. So let me just provide a little bit of context before we delve into the presentations. And I wanted to give a bit of context about the why we're here. And so integration into policy architectures is gathering pace, but it needs to happen quicker. What we're seeing, and we've discussed this a lot today, this transition from the voluntary space to compliance markets, as well as other government demand instruments such as subsidies. And there is a big focus on compliance markets. They're a good source of demand potentially, as we heard, depending on where the price settles in those markets. And as we've seen, the UK, the EU, Japan, all starting to move forward in this space. And a couple of reasons why there's this emphasis on compliance market integration. The first is what's been described as the ETS endgame. Some of you might be familiar with that concept. As we get out to 2040, the cap declines and it declines to zero. And in doing so, there's more volatility, the market becomes less liquid and prices will rise, which could undermine political support for emissions trading schemes and undermine the salience of them into the future. So integrating carbon dioxide removal into emissions trading schemes gives them a purpose beyond 2040. So that's one of the reasons we're seeing. The other is that many governments around the world are fiscally constrained, and using compliance market is a helpful way of funding CDR that falls off the government balance sheet. Although that has been contested, as the recent CCC letter did say, that doing it this way would actually not save the government much money. So we can debate that hopefully later today. So the why is increasingly understood, but questions about the how do we do it equitably, how do we do it responsibly, but also pragmatically. The when, the timing is critical. We discussed it earlier, carbon prices are currently around £40 in the UK, durable CDR well in excess of that. So the when is critical in order to create sufficient demand pull. And the what methods should we integrate? The CCC have outlined that woodland units should not be eligible in the UK ETS. This is one of the more contentious elements. The UK government has deferred that. So very interested to know what the panel think, what the audience think about what methods should be eligible for that integration. So that's the what, the when, and the how. And hopefully we'll cover that today in the leading jurisdictions. So as we said, UK has outlined this roadmap already. We know what the start date might be, around 2029. So why not a better place to start with Antigone, who's going to talk more about the UK and how integrating CDR can be done.
Thank you. I think I'm all mic'd up. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm Antigone Theochridou, a PhD student at Imperial College London, and I look at the integration of CDR into the UK ETS, bang on the money with what Josh was saying. What I'm intending on covering today is a bit on our CDR targets, how it is that the UK ETS currently operates, but also covering some of the inefficiencies that I have identified within the market. Of course, touching on the public consultation and the results that have recently come out. And then I will touch on my own modelling, which is on the integration of removals within the UK ETS, how I've done this modelling, what are the results, and the conclusions that I've drawn so far from my own work. So I know we're heading towards the end of the day, and some of you may already be tired, so I've put the key takeaways from the start and then you can zone out if you'd like. So, of course, CDR has, there's been discussion on whether is CDR necessary or is it just an option for us to use. I claim CDR is indeed necessary in order to meet net zero, and it can help in moderating carbon prices within the UK ETS scheme. However, the UK ETS does face structural stress, mainly due to the recent introduction of the maritime and energy from waste sectors, which we're going to see being introduced in 2026 and 2028, respectively. And also, the outcome of my modeling can show that we're leading towards a merchant market, which means that we will rely less and less on government support in order to fund CDR. But also, looking at the results of the public consultation, what is already out there, stakeholder concerns are real. There are risks out there. And I think that the consultation results really do highlight that, especially the fact that there's many decisions yet to be made on a few very key and important topics. So, to start us off, some of you may have already known this particular graph, or perhaps even worked on the creation of it. The State of CDR report has indicated that we will have a significant amount of residual emissions that would have to be mitigated through the use of CDR. Therefore, in order to meet net zero, CDR is indeed necessary. The IPCC's latest report has claimed roughly around 10 gigatons of CO2 per year would have to be removed by 2050 if we want to achieve that 1.5 degree target. But also, the UK's CCC Climate Change Committee has come out to say that we would need approximately 36 million tons of engineered removals just in the UK alone in order to reach net zero. How far along are we? Not so far at all. There's still a lot of progress to be made. And I think it's actually quite interesting to take a look at what is the difference between our sales and our deliveries of carbon credits. Just 2% of what has been sold has indeed been delivered so far, which is rather concerning and I think raises a lot of questions as to why this could be. So what is a cap and trade system? I probably don't need to spend a lot of time on what it is, but if we want to look at the UK ETS in particular and what it is that it covers so far, there's currently 3 sectors that are included, and that is power generation, heavy industry, and aviation, with the plans of including shipping from 2026 and energy from waste from 2028, as I previously mentioned. There's over 1,000 installations and aviation operators included in the ETS, and obviously we will see this expanding soon. The cap and the reduction targets of the ETS were set well below the EU ETS notional share. So after Brexit, once the UK ETS was established in 2021, we set our cap at 5% lower than what was set within the EU ETS framework. The allocation, although, works the same way, still with free allowances handed out and decided using benchmarking and with auctions occurring at a bi-weekly rate. Our cap currently stands at around 80 to 90 million tons of CO2. That's the number of allowances available in circulation. And our average auction price varies from 30 to 50. And although the EU ETS is roughly £60, we can see that both markets are nowhere near the level they should be if we'd like to include engineered removals within our schemes. And the total revenue is pretty high, and we'll expect it to keep growing. And so there's also a question on how do we use this money, and are we making sure that this money is being used efficiently and effectively? I think another key point that we should make is how many of our UK emissions are covered by the UK ETS. As of today, as of 2023, in fact, they're at 27%, but that still is the case for today, since only new sectors we're seeing to be included would be from 2026. This raises questions on if we were to integrate removals into the UK ETS, is this a good way to actually target those high emitters? From just this graphic, one could say no, they're not as high proportion compared to the EU ETS, so where we'd see roughly 50% to 60% of emitters being included within the EU ETS. Therefore, this is another important consideration to have, and comes to show that we do need to include more and more sectors and more emitters within the UK ETS framework if we want to be targeting high emitters and incentivizing investment in removals. So, having done an installations analysis, which is essentially taking a look at each and every one of the UK ETS installations and how many free allowances they have received over the years, since 2021, the creation and the beginning of the UK ETS, I have identified quite a significant number of installations or companies that have received more than 100% of their emissions as free allowances. That is to say that they've essentially or effectively received a subsidy between the years of 2021 and 2022. And I'm highlighting a few key culprits here. Cemex, who have, of course, been doing very well in terms of their decarbonization, have received free allowances for a plant that had no emissions being generated in 2021 and 2022. And similarly, with the paper company DS Smith Limited, received over 300,000 free allowances for a plant generating next to nothing. So far, the UK ETS has been working rather inefficiently, has been handing out free allowances to installations that indeed are not generating the emissions that they perhaps are claiming or not. And this will come very important when we are looking into the integration of removals and price spikes that this integration could cause if we're looking at players banking a significant number of free allowances who, I'm assuming, would then rationally use these free allowances later on in the future. So this comes to show that this is actually a rather important consideration to have. And so, moving on to the public consultation that we spoke about earlier, the results have come out, and this is a key summary or a key takeaway of what has happened so far. The results indicate that the legislation target would be the end of 2028, with an operational target for end of 2029. Effectively, beginning of 2030 or beginning of the next decade would be the time when we'd see removals indeed operating within the market. The cap type is still considered to be maintained as what was previously decided on, which is a gross cap. The allowance award would be ex post, i.e. once the removal has indeed occurred. And the minimum number of storage years is 200 years. We'll see a bit more on this just on the next slide. The allowance differentiation is something that is still pretty much in discussion, but what is being indicated is that we could have GGR allowances, greenhouse gas removal allowances, and UK allowances. However, there's still discussion on the price differentiation between these two. Would we see the same price for both, or different prices for different types of removal? That's yet to be decided, and I think a rather interesting discussion to have. The market access, or the way these GGR allowances would be sold, would still be via auction, so the same way that UK allowances are sold today. The supply control is still transitional and consistent with our net zero target, and the removal location would be limited to the UK only. And so comparing what the UK has shown compared to other countries that have similar schemes, the UK has decided on a 200-year minimum storage time frame, whereas other countries have shown a rather significantly smaller restriction on that. And I think that comes to show that we are being rather conservative on this matter. It doesn't mean it's wrong or right, but it's a stance that the UK is taking. There's also the buffer pool that the UK ETS has decided to use in order to mitigate any risks that could come about with our offset credits. And also a pretty key difference is that the UK ETS has suggested a seller liability compared to other systems such as California that have applied a buyer liability. This is the liability of the credit, i.e. if there is reversal to the removal that has been claimed to have occurred, the liability would, or the onus would be on the seller in the UK, whereas in California, the onus would be on the buyer. I think that's a pretty key difference there to note. Similarly, the EU ETS has been following suit. The EU ETS came out with a public consultation on a similar topic, but also included a lot of other things as well. But looking primarily on what was said on removals from stakeholders responding to the public consultation, I undertook the rather tedious task of doing a sentiment analysis of the stakeholder responses. And there's definitely a key push or a key drive amongst stakeholders to indeed integrate removals within the EU ETS. However, there's a few key concerns that were raised in both the UK and EU ETS consultations. And I think this, of course, is important considering the recent announcements for linking between EU and UK ETSs. If we were to indeed move in that direction, I think it would be rather important to decide how it is that we would integrate removals in both systems and what is the interplay between the two. Could we sell removals from one jurisdiction to the other, and how does that work? And then also how the differences between how we, or our criteria for our removal credits would also play a big role there. And then moving on swiftly to the modeling that I've undertaken so far. Of course, a lot of different researchers out there use different methods, take a more broad perspective or a more narrow perspective of what it is they're doing. My own work looks at essentially creating a partial equilibrium model with an optimization aspect, minimizing cost in a more rational way for the actors participating in the market. And so the model framework itself has 4 key areas of inputs. The policy inputs, which include our allowance cap trajectory as decided by DESNES, our emission target pathway, also described in our Carbon Budget 7. The market design, i.e. how it is that the ETS works. There's a price floor and ceiling, and the market stability reserve, which essentially describes how the cost containment mechanism works, and I'll touch upon that later. I've also created a marginal abatement cost curve. This includes all the different abatement technologies available to the UK system as a whole and the cost that comes with those. And of course, historic data inputs of the historic carbon prices, how they played out so far, and baseline emissions we've shown. So my partial equilibrium optimization model has 2 key outputs. The carbon price pathway that we would expect to see, but also the level of CDR deployment if we were to integrate removals. How the model works is that it finds a market equilibrium, and that is an equilibrium between demand and supply. How I define demand is the difference between our emissions minus our free allowances and total reductions. That is effectively our net demand, or the level of demand that we would expect from market participants to drive purchases of allowances. And supply, of course, is the level of allowances that we expect to see in the market. So that would be the UK allowances plus any removal allowances if we were to integrate, plus the MSR if the MSR were to be drawn. And this, again, refers to the cost containment mechanism, which I also touch upon here. So as the model begins to run, free allowances are met first. Those are cleared first, and then the model has the option of purchasing UK allowances at the optimal price, reducing emissions or removing emissions, of course, minimizing cost. If the output of our carbon price is 3 times higher than the two years average historic price, which is how the MSR works in our policy, then the cost containment mechanism kicks in, and then the model reruns by adding more allowances within the system, and that effectively drops our carbon price. And interestingly, the expansion of or expansion of our scope to include maritime and energy from waste is done rather differently to how previous sectors had it. These sectors, rather than receiving free allowances, we would see the cap expanding, i.e. more allowances are available to buy at auction, which would effectively drop the price. However, from my own work, what you can see here is that as the cap increases, in 2028, the cap increases rather significantly compared to 2027. So there are more allowances available. However, the amount of emissions that come from energy from waste are much higher even than that. And so from my results, you can see in 2028 to 2029, there's rather big spike. And that is due to the increased demand that we would see with the inclusion of shipping and energy from waste, which is a rather important consideration if we want to also talk about the integration of removals. If we do integrate removals, as you can see in 2030, the price drops. This shows that we can contain our price levels through the use of removals. On this graph, I'm actually showing 3 different scenarios, which is no CDR integration, using only engineered removals if we were to integrate removals and minimizing cost, and also including nature-based removals as an option. What I'd like to highlight is that in the no CDR integration scenario, you'd see a price spike again later on in the 2030s, and that comes to show that CDR being involved in our system and being available to purchase can in fact moderate our carbon prices. And interestingly, from my model, these are the annual additional reductions and removals that I get as an output from my model. And as you can see, 2030 is the year where the removals begin and kick in. A lot of reduction is taken up in the first few years, so from 2025 to 2036, and then more removals are taken on later on towards the ETS endgame, as we call it, which was what we expect. And so a few limitations of the model. The model doesn't include any banking dynamics, which also touches upon the free allowances that I described were handed out freely to a few companies. So there's also a lack of data on how it is that how many allowances companies purchase. So the banking and hedging effects of this are not included in the model. Also, any administrative costs or MRV are also not included. The auctions, like I said, are intra-year, so they're bi-weekly. This is also not reflected in the model, as the resolution of the model currently is annual. And price differentiation is still something that is being considered. We're still expecting to see from DESNZ whether they're expecting to have different prices for different types of GGR allowances or not. And so that's something yet to be seen. And so to conclude, my modeling has shown that moderation of prices can indeed occur with the integration of removals. We can work towards a merchant model, which is to say that we would require less and less of government support compared to where we stand today. And the introduction of maritime and energy from waste do indeed increase our demand significantly, and removals could play a role in mitigating that extreme demand. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that working? Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's interesting, you can see the political motivation for integrating CDR, given how high prices might be. So that kind of really speaks to that point. So thank you very much. I think what's also really interesting is the UK is really innovating in this space at a pace that is quicker than the EU and other counterparties. So it'd be very interesting to see if the UK does link how much of that innovation and policy development is retained or is subsumed under any kind of linking agreement. We'll have to keep an eye out for that. But I imagine as a smaller counterparty, the UK might have to give up some of these policy innovations. But speaking of the EU, maybe we'll move now on to more of an EU perspective. So I'll hand over to Hafa. Thank you. I know you've got yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be participating in this great event today. My name is Hrafnhildur Bragadóttir. I'm a PhD student at the University of Iceland, Faculty of Law. I've worked in climate and environmental law and policy for several years, including for the government of Iceland and as a consultant. I am, however, still relatively new to carbon removal, so this day has been a wonderful opportunity to learn from so many experts here, and I've learned a lot today, especially in the coffee breaks, and I'm excited to continue the discussions into the evening. Just for a brief background, my PhD looks at the role of corporate climate efforts, particularly in the context of the voluntary carbon market, or the VCM. I'm especially interested in how these voluntary initiatives connect and intersect with national climate commitments. We're starting to see, as we've heard today, more governments engage with the VCM in different ways. For example, in Denmark and Sweden, there are recent initiatives that combine public funding with revenue from sales of carbon credits in the voluntary market. And while such efforts definitely create important synergies, they sometimes also raise complicated questions, and because public and private actors operate under different rules, they have often different motivations and so on, which can lead to some kind of a misalignment between public and private climate action, which may, in some cases, produce some unintended consequences. I mean, they can be good, they can be bad. We've heard a lively discussion about double claiming earlier today, which was very interesting. And this ties into broader integrity challenges with the VCM and supports calls for stronger government intervention in the market. And the main point here is that, not surprisingly, after this day, of course, there is a need to clarify how voluntary markets interact with national targets, for example, around issues such as additionality and double claiming. So against this background, the core question I'm exploring in my PhD thesis is, how can government support private climate efforts like those in the VCM while making sure they reinforce rather than undermine global climate goals? Lately, I've been focusing more directly on carbon dioxide removals, especially the permanent industrial ones like bags and bags. Coming from Iceland, I've been able to watch some of these developments up close. I know there is a person from Climeworks here, so there's a picture for you. Projects like Climework and Carbfix operate in Iceland, and they use Iceland's clean, renewable energy and its very suitable geology that allows for permanent CO2 storage. These photos are from Hellisheiði, which is an area just outside of the capital city, Reykjavik. And there Climeworks runs its direct air capture plant, and Carbfix injects in these tiny buildings CO2 into basalt formations for permanent storage. These projects have attracted a lot of attention in Iceland recently, not just because of their promise for the climate, but also because of some negative media coverage and some public opposition, especially to Carbfix operations in one part of the country. And I think it's safe to say that these discussions in Iceland have been very confusing, and not well informed, although the companies have tried to provide information and correct misunderstandings. But what I really miss as a climate lawyer and policy expert in Iceland from these discussions is just how relevant really these operations are for the Icelandic climate policy and the Icelandic context. And I'm assuming that similar situations are likely playing out in many other countries. There's considerable difficulty in communicating this to the public, but also, and which is kind of more concerning to me, is to policymakers. As you may know, Iceland is in a somewhat good position when it comes to climate mitigation. Its electricity is all from renewable sources, and most houses are heated with geothermal heating. And if you've been there, you know that there's no need for air conditioning, as I've experienced this summer. However, despite all of this, emissions in Iceland have actually increased by 27% since 1990. And per capita emissions in Iceland are among the highest in Europe. So there are several reasons for this, of course, but one of them is that about 40% of Iceland's emissions are hard to abate process emissions from industries like aluminum and metal production. So in Iceland, industrial CDR isn't just an interesting future technology or a nice to have. First of all, it's already there. It's already something that you see when you drive out of Reykjavik. It's actually hard to see these from the ring road, but they give tours, and many people are very interested in what's going on, and schools and workplaces go there just to take a look and get familiar with these operations. And secondly, if you look at the state and trends of Iceland's emissions, it seems already necessary. I mean, for the Icelandic climate policy to consider these possibilities. And this does not, in my mind, apply only for some climate goals far into the future, the second half of the century, or something that seems very far away, but also for meeting the target of the Icelandic government of becoming climate neutral by 2040, 10 years ahead of the EU. However, as in many countries, there is no clear CDR target in Iceland, no clear policy, no regulatory framework in place to support the development and deployment of industrial removals. And I haven't really seen any kind of governmental response to the recent debates about these projects. So it's kind of interesting to see, and has led me to ask, how can we begin to strategically integrate permanent CDR into national legal and policy framework so it complements emissions reductions and becomes a real part of net zero planning. And I've brought this Icelandic perspective into a broader look at how the EU is addressing permanent carbon removals, and how private finance, particularly investments through the voluntary carbon market, can help scale up these technologies. If we look at the EU legal framework, we see that permanent carbon removals are not a part of the 2030 target, which is focused on reducing emissions and increasing land-based removals. So for now, permanent CDR isn't contributing to the collective EU target legally. But with the proposed 90% target for 2040, we're likely beginning to see a shift within the EU. The European Commission has now opened the door to new options, including the potential inclusion into the EU ETS and allowing international removal credits to contribute up to a small percentage to the target. However, we don't really know what the plan is for permanent carbon removals in the 2050 net zero target. We know, of course, that they will become increasingly important, and to use the word of the IPCC, they will become unavoidable for net zero. But even though the future of the permanent CTR is unclear, there are some early signs in EU law pointing to its growing relevance. For example, the CRCF, the carbon removal and carbon farming regulation, which may eventually enable voluntary carbon removals to be integrated into the EU compliance mechanisms. The state aid and some EU funding options are beginning to support early stage industrial removal projects. DACs and BECs are included in EU taxonomy, identified as net zero technologies in the Net Zero Industry Act, with the intention of incentivizing private investments. And as I mentioned, and then you know, of course, the EU is now considering including them into the EU ETS. So despite all the uncertainty, we have at least some indications that permanent CTRs are moving from the margins towards the center of the EU climate policy. And this has happened very fast. There are only a few years since industrial and permanent removals sort of were discussed in this way in the EU. Nevertheless, there are many questions that need to be answered about how it actually fits within EU's legal framework, which is built in a simple way, or simply speaking, around these 5 core legal instruments, although many others are, of course, very important. First, the European climate law, which sets the overall EU targets, the effort sharing regulation, which has binding national targets for sectors such as road transport and agriculture. The LULUCF regulation, which will soon require member states to meet national land-based removal targets. And finally, the EU ETS, of course, but finally, an instrument which is often overlooked, which is the governance regulation, which really ties the system of target setting and obligations together by ensuring coordination, planning and reporting across member states. And these instruments, particularly these 3, are designed to collectively cover all emissions that fall under the EU's NDC. They reflect some key principles like fairness, respect for national circumstances, and cost effectiveness. So now when permanent removal seems to be emerging as a new regulatory pillar within the EU, the question becomes, can we integrate them into this existing system, or do we need to create something new? And by just looking at the existing framework, if the goal is to scale up domestic industrial CTR in Europe, there are some clear potential entryways into the core climate instruments. One of them has been discussed a lot lately in relation to the Commission's proposal on the 2040 target, which is to establish an EU-wide target for carbon removals, separate from the emission reduction target, and define this in the European climate law. If you look at the provisions of the European climate law, you see there is a lot of ambiguity on how it addresses carbon removals and how it defines sinks and other words that are crucial to understand what really falls under or can fall under the EU target. I think this should have been the best way forward, to create a separate target, but it seems to be a little bit too ambitious right now, or at least not politically feasible, considering the proposal. Second, at some point it will be necessary to consider national targets. for industrial removals. And there are some writings on this in the literature, but not very many. More focus, of course, on the incorporation of the EU ETS right now. So obviously this isn't feasible yet, and this is not really on the table. Given the limited time I have, I'm not going to go into details of any of these options, but I want to highlight that the task of figuring out how to include permanent CDR into these instruments lies, of course, in the high level of uncertainty that policymakers are faced with. Not something new for the EU, of course. There has been uncertainty about many things, but this is maybe a new kind of uncertainty. It has a lot to do with cost, of course, and how that will develop in the coming years. How will demand increase? When? What kinds of revenue models will work in the long run? And how will emerging frameworks, legal frameworks, both at the EU and national level, influence private finance of CDR projects? And there, I think, a lot can be learned from these initiatives, for example, in Sweden and Denmark. So this is something that the EU institutions have to try to learn from and notice. There are also very different conditions across member states, and we don't really know too much about their plans and priorities when it comes to permanent carbon removals. We know that a lot of public funding will be needed. We know also it won't be enough, and then the voluntary market can help by bringing in private capital, but that in itself raises a new set of challenges. So right now we are perhaps caught in a dilemma. There are too many questions on the table to be answered before it becomes feasible to define targets. But at the same time, we can't afford to wait. And yet these uncertainties, of course, they are linked to kind of all aspects of the issue. So very simply put, these are the two main challenges: tackling the legal gaps and uncertainties that affect project development, investment, and long-term planning. And secondly, doing it fast enough. Targets that used to be long-term targets, and I've worked in the climate space since 2009, and I remember how far 2020 used to be in the future, and now 2030. Now the NDCs that are due in September have to cover the period up to 2035, which is 5 years before Iceland is going to become carbon neutral with no plan on permanent removals. So it shows how fast we are approaching these formerly long-term goals. And there is a pressing need to move faster. And that leads to my main message today, which is that although it may not be feasible yet to set EU or national removal targets, there is absolutely no need in my mind to wait with building the institutional and legal readiness using what we already know and already have. And in that context, the topic of this conference, the idea of carbon removal budget, is in my mind very relevant. And I was very happy when I read your article about it because it sort of fit exactly with what I had been thinking about in terms of building legal readiness. It has to be used as a planning tool, or it can be used as a planning tool, which can help us move away from this situation where there are almost paralyzing uncertainties about everything, and into a situation where we're at least ready to take the first step of integrating industrial removals into our net zero strategies. And luckily, in the EU, we aren't starting entirely from scratch. There are at least 2 existing instruments that could provide a foundation for the development of the EU CRB. First, the governance regulation, which I mentioned before, is a part of the core climate framework and already requires member states to submit national energy and climate plans where they must describe their planned policies and measures and give an overview of investments that are needed. And this structure could be extended to include information relevant to industrial CDR, such as mapping national potential, identifying legal and technical obstacles, and documenting experiences with public-private financing models. And second, the CF regulation could also play a role in supporting the CRB by ensuring environmental integrity, defining high-quality methodologies, and supporting transparency. So my point is that the EU is in a fairly good position to start tackling these uncertainties around carbon removals, and there is no reason to wait with strategic information gathering, early coordination, and using the existing tools like this one to build the procedural and institutional infrastructure that will allow for more ambitious integration of carbon removals down the line. So in summary and to conclude, CRB could play a valuable role in reducing legal uncertainty and guiding policy development. In the short term, it could help clarify expected supply and demand, which would make it easier to choose the right policy tools to accelerate investment. This would in turn improve the predictability of future policy decisions, which would help with building investor confidence. And with more clarity, it would likely be easier to build public acceptance. I also think that an EU CRB could create a better sense of common goals across both member states and private actors, and thus could help align public and private incentives, especially around the voluntary market. Then in the longer term, when costs have hopefully come down, and once the technologies, infrastructures, and legal foundations are better established, a CRB could help pave the way for further integration into the EU climate instruments. Thank you.
Thank you. I really like what you said about the need to build on what we already have, to balance the need for bespoke arrangements versus the need to develop at speed. And I think that speaks to a much broader point about how do you balance stringency and pragmatism, and we're always trying to weigh up that in an industry we're getting off the ground, but we need to do very quickly. So thank you very much. Okay, our last speaker, Ashir, over to you.
First of all, thank you for having me over here. Myself, Ashir Rahman. I came from a place that happened to see a lot of floods in the childhood. So most of the time, our people from my area, we were thinking like how we can mitigate this risk. After my engineering, I started working with pension funds. That was literally a contrasting thing. We were doing stewardship engagement, like increasing the SDG and ESG values of the pension funds back in US. We thought like this kind of big pension funds will have a great impact on the ground. But somehow we were a startup, we done our sprint and we are finished. After that, we started working with carbon offsetting. I was in Congo, I was in Kenya. I was on the ground working with the carbon offset, integrating them and getting money through them through blockchain. After some time, we sold the startup. And I had an opportunity to work with a lot of companies as a consultant for TCFD, SFDR, CSRD. There is a lot of acronyms that was coming out at that time. Currently, I'm working with around 1.5 lakh farmers in India. We are helping them to get to know about what is regenerative farming. Because in India, there is a huge opportunity in the carbon offsetting sector. So, for example, if I say carbon offsetting to some people, they will say like, oh, you're doing carbon offsetting, that's really bad. That's not really bad. That's good for the people, the indigenous people, the people having this language barriers, the people don't know what's happening in the EU and the US, and they are getting the scope 3 of the people you know, so it's a good thing for the people back in the global south. So basically my presentation is about India and UK. I'm not going to take a long time because some of my good friends already presented the things which I am going to present. And one of my good friends from India, he already presented the things which I have written already. So basically, let's get to the point. So basically everyone knows about this because I'm seeing everyone's first page is similar to this. So basically, 10 to 20 gigatons carbon dioxide removal needed annually by 2050, and the metrics is over there. We need at least 5 to 10 times of scale-up increase. So the reduction is not just sufficient. We need to find out different means, different ways to reduce the current carbon which is in the atmosphere that we call net in the site. I think I can skip this one because most of the people know about this one. So coming on this technology landscape, so there are two types of solutions on my side. That is the natural-based solutions and engineered solutions. For example, in the natural-based solutions, you can see the cost is lower and there is a lot of benefits for us, but there is a lot of risk as well. But coming on the engineering solutions, currently it is in good performance because my good friend from Iceland and there is a lot of people who came from Finland and Denmark, they were talking good about this direct air carbon capture. So this is it, and there is a higher cost for these engineering solutions and is energy intensive. So you can see over here, the natural-based solutions, it's like a 14 times cost difference between the direct air carbon capture, the current direct air carbon capture. So from the current point of view, the current research, the people will say like when we get into 2030, the DAC will reduce at least by 60% the cost of doing DAC. I hope that happens soon. And so this is a comparison which I made. So you can see the market growth trends which is happening in the sector. The DAC growth is exponentially increasing. So in 2030, the growth will be around 17 times. And around 628 projects, CCUS projects happened in 2024. That's a good thing. And 9.2 billion CCUS investment in 2024 as well. So on that side, you can see the projects and investments. So everything is optimistic. So regarding the UK, but I don't think I need to explain this one as well. Most of the people already know what's happening over there. It's a legally binding system. I worked with some of the companies over here as well, and it's good to see people take these things very seriously. The accounting things and whatever happening things and very seriously, and they don't do any kind of scams or frauds in their accounting system. So talking about this UK carbon budget, 3/3 of the budget is already achieved. And 68% of the reduction is there since 2008 when the CB came out. So it's UK is already achieving their 2050 net zero target. So coming to the India case study, where I'm coming from, where I'm working on the ground at this moment, there is a lot of lands available, and currently the carbon credit rate is very low. And is around the global market, it is less regarded because there is less MRV, which is the kind of MRV systems which is available on the market is not that much. And there are some people who are doing third-party verification combined with MRV. And there is a lot of investments which is coming into India from the pension funds as well. So it's a good thing, like India is growing, and I can literally say like within few years, India is going to be one of the good system where you can find out like low carbon solutions in this in this removal system. So this is a policy integration framework which literally I made for this India. Already in UK, it's already done because literally last week there is a good update from UK as well. In India, what's happening is 2 years ago, there is a ESG framework which they put as a white paper, and we are still hoping something will work out soon. And on this side, you can see we need, the most important thing over here is an independent oversight. We need a team which doing an independent oversight, and they can't be influenced. And also the MRV. MRV is currently, as I'm not able to, because I'm in the market for around 10, 12 years, I'm literally not able to see a good MRV. Everyone is using the geospatial data, and they are selling for big companies. And literally, we are also trying to figure out a good MRV where everyone have that kind of credibility. So it will be easy for the people from the Global South to sell the credits. And also coming to the anti-reversal, having some insurance will increase the credibility of the investor if they are ready to invest in the places like Global South. So this is the implementation roadmap in India. As I said, first we need to set up the legal framework. Then we need to go for the market mechanism, as I said, MRV. Then we will go for the scale deployment. Scale deployment in the sense, while I was working in the companies which having the CCU, they look for something that have executive remuneration. They will look for something that will get benefit for them, not just they invest and they just stay away. So for example, I can say an impact investment. Everyone is looking for they are giving good for people and planet and getting some profit out of it. Profit in the sense in the corporate, executive remuneration. So basically, a scale deployment should be something people are getting something out of it, those who are doing it. So these are my next steps. I believe already these kind of things are already talked on by a lot of people over there. Just to mention something over there, just transition for affected communities. So as I can see, if you want to reduce the carbon emissions or if you want to do something, we can't have one solution fit for all. For example, emission factor for UK is not going to be same as in India. And also, if someone a commoner, they want to go for some place through train or buses or something, you can't say to him, you go by walk. It can be done through some other people, but they can't be implemented in the same areas. So we need to have different solutions for different areas, depending upon the geographies and all. So this is my presentation, a small presentation, and just to end, the time of action is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think your last point there about international cooperation stands particularly pertinent. As Antijoni was saying, and the UK, the EU, different jurisdictions developing different standards, different levels of stringency, and how can we have interoperability across those different countries or jurisdictions if operators or suppliers have to comply with different standards? So I think that's an ongoing challenge we have to tackle. So we have just under 15 minutes for Q&A. So does anyone want to kick us off? Yes, hand straight away. Steve, I'm roaming mic and chair at the same time.
Multitasking, Josh. Yeah, Steve Smith from the University of Oxford. Thank you for 3 great talks. My question is for Antigone. I'm delighted you're modelling the UK ETS with all these changes. It's really important work, so thank you and well done. I was particularly struck by the plots you showed of carbon removal volumes in your modelling work. And if I understood them right, I think there was 3.1 million tonnes of CDR that comes in 2030. And I was just wondering, what's your kind of constraint there for the near term? We did a piece of work and we reckon there's maybe 2.6 million tonnes if you take an optimistic view on kind of all the BECCS and DACS plants that might plug into a transport and storage infrastructure if we get our act together in quick enough time. So I had that question about the near term, what are your constraints there? But then also it looked like it kind of stayed at 3 million tonnes throughout. So I'm really interested, what are you assuming about the ETS cap? And given the likes of the Climate Change Committee is saying we probably need 35 million tonnes of BECCS and DACS to get to UK net zero, what is your modelling telling you about the ability of the ETS to drive that kind of volume?
Yeah. Thank you for your question, Steve. So in terms of the 2030 figure, I mean, the way the model works is very much on cost minimization. And if we're looking at including woodland credits and other nature-based removals, the model will optimize itself by driving that removal bar up. So that's probably the key reason why you see that change. It's not to say that it's the absolute way to go, and especially considering that we're still not certain whether any of these woodland credits would be included, that would ever make any sense. But that is the model outcome so far.
And then it stays flat throughout, is that right?
Well, I would argue that generally towards the end of the or the ETS endgame, as we call it, or towards 2040s, there was more removal compared to reduction. And also, I'd probably have to clarify if that wasn't clear. This is referring to increased removal per year rather than any previous cumulative reduction and removal happening previously, if that helps.
Question for, well, probably, yeah.
For me?
Yeah, for you, yeah. For Hilda and Antigone. Antigone, you had a graph of UK and ETS, like perception in the public. It was UK and EU. I wasn't sure whether it was UK or EU data, and I was interested in the variation in public perception to carbon removal projects, and then where it links into your research, you'd kind of mentioned further down the line having more national scale targets or regulation. And so, yeah, if you have any idea, firstly, UK versus EU, and then within the EU, it's not a homogenous block. So if there are any patterns on different countries' attitudes, any particular examples?
So I've done this very tedious task of a sentiment analysis from the publicly available responses that I could find for both of the consultations, both the UK and the EU. What I presented was from the EU consultation, because those are on the EU website and they really are publicly available. So there's over 1,000 responses that refer to removals, because this was a much bigger public consultation to the UK one that was focused on just the integration. And what I found was that there was an overwhelming support for this integration. However, there were key concerns raised in most of them, and I think most is what we've already discussed today. Permanence, how many years are we expecting to store the CO2? Additionality, for sure, and fungibility. So those were probably the three key things that were covered in the EU ETS responses, but also in the UK. I wouldn't say I found any particular differences between the two that were striking. Is there anything you wanted to know?
And just to add, we're already seeing quite large differences in the way the EU and the UK are looking at those issues. So on the duration of carbon stored, it's 200 years in the UK, 100 in the EU, 40 years in the ICVCM. So we're already seeing this kind of fragmentation of standards. And similarly with what methods are eligible, and this speaks to the fungibility point, the EU is probably taking a slightly more stringent position, saying we don't think non-permanent woodland units might be appropriate for integration. But on the UK side, there's still that open question of whether the UK have deferred that, which is probably one of the more contentious elements of the consultation. Okay. Name and organisation as well, please.
Thank you, Alex Money from Oxford. Ashir, thank you very much for what I thought was an excellent presentation. I learnt a lot from it. I was really struck by the remark you were making that it's not just the cost of the CDR intervention to consider, but it's also the modality in the local context of whether that's appropriate, and then other vectors of development outcome. It's a question really back to myself, but Is there work that you think we should be doing as researchers, as academics, to try to better understand how policymakers should triangulate the sort of options they have between different CDR interventions that are more reflective of exactly what you say? Because it seems to me that that's a really important part in terms of the policy engagement piece. And if you have any suggestions about how we should think about that, I'd be very grateful. Thanks.
I can give an example. 3 years ago, I was working in Japan with a company, and we were working with the Yanagi model. Yanagi model is like non-financial capital value creation. So you invest in specific KPIs, it will enhance your PBR. So basically, I have done a research paper on that. And a lot of issues happen with the research paper is around data. Academicians need 40 years of data. I'm a practitioner myself, but I like to see academicians everywhere because we can learn from them. There is no 40 years of data. There is only 5 years of data where I can get the data from. And I'm not able to get the sensible data from the big corporates. I'm getting the data from financial institutions. So there is a lot of issues that need to be addressed. And that's why I also put forward a lot of ESG reports which is coming out the market. I can't say it's genuine. There is a lot of things happening here and there. So I believe academicians, as you all, from a practitioner of my side, like if there should be some kind of like a mechanism to adjust and understand. And as one of a colleague from here, she also told like you need to talk with the communities. When you talk with the communities, you will know what the real issue is. So in India, it's not about carbon, it's not about climate, it's about roti, kapda, makan. It's like food, shelter, and roti, kapda, makan means house. Because my Hindi is not good, I'm from South India. And so basically, I believe like academicians combined with a practitioner, they go on the ground, they can do wonderful things. There is, because I raised a venture capital over here in London, and I was working closely with Carbon 13. That's an incubator, that's an accelerator in Cambridge. So what they are doing is an excellent example. They are putting up the academicians and they are putting up the practitioners together, mixing up and doing things for the climate. They are not caring about the profit. They are only caring about how much tons of carbon dioxide you can reduce. That's where they are investing. So we need that kind of systems. I believe back in my place because UK is perfect for me while comparing from India.
Time for probably 2 more questions. Okay, one for me then. So I'd be interested to hear in each of the kind of jurisdictions that you'll focus on, what kind of the main institutional, legal, or economic or political challenges of integrating CDR into policy or legal frameworks, either from India, EU, or you want to start with the EU? We've not heard as much.
Yeah, I can use it. I think if we look at the EU, and I'm often preoccupied with what is happening in the Nordic countries, Iceland being one of them, it seems to me often that just the fragmentation that is going on in the voluntary market is one of the main challenges. I mean, there are obviously many other challenges which have been discussed today, but the funny thing about the fragmentation, for example, in the Nordic countries, which are closely tied in so many ways, is that it seems that information takes a long time to travel between neighboring countries, and it's sometimes surprising to me, especially in an area where there are so many opportunities for cooperation. You see that pretty clearly in the carbon removal space, where some countries like Sweden and Finland have a lot of BACs potential, which Iceland and Norway do not in the same way, at least not Iceland. But Iceland and Norway have plenty of storage space. So for me, attacking these communication issues seems to be a really good way forward. And when we talk about fragmentation, we sometimes talk about it like it's just something supernatural or something that there's no way to deal with. But sometimes, especially when you're in a group like this, it seems so easy. So, and there is a new report on the cooperation potential of the Nordic countries on carbon removal from a new, can't remember the name now.
Kind of the Nordic carbon removal trade body.
Yeah. Which is sort of just laying out these cooperation potentials, and I hope that will lead to something more communication really fast. Because we tend to wait, at least in Iceland, we tend to wait 5 years reacting to something, see what the others are going to do, and then maybe later do something about it. So that's, if I can change something in Iceland, that would just be to act faster on issues like this.
And if we look at India, are there challenges, are there a lot of commonalities in the challenges that the UK and the EU are facing, or are there things that are particularly bespoke to the Indian context, do you think?
So in India, there is around like 28 states. One state is as much as big as UK. Every state is different. Every state have different languages, different people, different culture, different foods. Everything is different. So getting into something over there is quite difficult. So as we are all saying, like one solution doesn't fit for all. I believe in India we need at least 28 solutions for different things. And also there is nothing like a legally binding regulation or something over there. But if a legally binding regulations comes to India, it will affect the common people or something. It will increase the cost. So we need to find out something in India that can reduce the cost, or that doesn't affect the common people, that affect the people who are doing these big tons of carbon emissions.
Similar problem in many countries. How do we pay for carbon removal in an equitable way that charges the right people? Maybe an aviation tax is the way to go. We can leave that for a separate discussion. So I think that is time. I'm actually over time. So one last round of applause for the speakers, please.